Okay, this is part 3 of our presentation on helping and healing the microbiota. And we left off last time we were talking about oligosaccharides in breast milk. Oligosaccharides are something that we don't have the ability to ferment. They're a polysaccharide that we don't have the digestive enzymes to digest, but the bacteria that's in the colon do. So the mother is able to produce these oligosaccharides that go in the breast milk, and these oligosaccharides can then be fermented by beneficial bacteria that are in the colon, and they help keep that baby's digestive tract healthy. And pretty amazing that we have the ability to do that. The short chain fatty acids that are also produced from digesting these oligosaccharides help to maintain tight intestinal junctions within the GI tract. So we talked about how we want the cells in the GI tract to have a nice tight fit with one another. We don't want to have space in between those, because when we have space, things can leak out that don't belong into the general circulation. So we want to keep those junctions nice and tight, and the short chain fatty acids that are produced when we ferment oligosaccharides can help do that. Also in breast milk, there's other components like defensins and lactoferrins that inhibit pathogens, and they help control microbial activity by curbing more pathogenic forms of bacteria and encouraging beneficial forms. The last thing you see on there is secretory IgA. This is a type of antibody, and this type of antibody that's released in breast milk also just to helps promote the beneficial forms of bacteria in the GI tract. So even some breastfeeding is better than none. So don't get the mindset that if you can only do it for a little bit, it's just not worth it. It's better to do some than not at all. A lot of people think that breastfeeding is supposed to come really easily and naturally, and it can be challenging. I had one child in particular that it was pretty challenging with, and I had to consult a lactation specialist, and it was really helpful. So I'd encourage anybody that has issues, call a lactation specialist, get some help so that you can be able to do that for your baby. Because the effects, as I'll note in some of this other research coming up, is far-reaching for how it can affect them actually throughout their whole life. Researchers are also finding that gut behavior, or our gut microbes and our behavior are linked. So one of the ways that they discovered this is they had two different kinds of mice. Some mice that were specifically bred to be shy and timid, and some mice that were specifically bred to be risk takers and more gregarious. And when they transplant the microbiota of the risk-taking mice into the more timid mice, they find that the timid mice, their behavior changes and they become better at taking risks. In fact, the way they did this in the study is they had them up on a high place, and they timed how long it took them to jump down. And the shy mice took significantly longer than it would take the gregarious or the risk-taking mice. But they saw significant change in the amount of time. So even our gut microbes can be a reflection of how willing we are to take risks in our life. ADD and ADHD have been linked with certain types of microbiotas. So the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition reported, this is an article that reported some of these findings that are listed here. Children that were breastfed were far less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. The length of breastfeeding and risk of ADHD are related. So the longer you breastfeed, the less the lower the risk of ADHD. Also, they found that frequent ear infections and antibiotic use was highly associated with an increased risk for ADHD. Also, children that were born by C-section had a 3 times higher risk of having ADHD. So you can see there as well the benefits of vaginal birth and also being really cautious about antibiotics. The first 3 years of life are when the microbiota is really forming and can be where the insults against that microbiota can be the greatest and have lasting consequences. Autism is another, and things along the autism spectrum disorder. Autism, there's a lot of research that's going on about this right now and how the microbiota can influence or has influenced the risk of getting autism. There's some things that they know for sure. They know that people that have autism have a very unique microbiota, and it's different than people that are healthy, okay? We know that the prevalence of autism has increased dramatically over the last 50 years. And it's fascinating that it's kind of in line with the widespread use of antibiotics. I mean, for those that are not familiar with this, antibiotics really kind of came into initial use right around the time of World War II and didn't start coming into full use until after the war. So we have had a dramatic increase in the use of antibiotics since that time, since the late 40s, early 50s and on. And as we've also seen with that dramatic rise, the rise of several other chronic conditions. But nowadays, 1 in 68 American kids is being diagnosed as being somewhere on that autism spectrum, which is incredibly high. We talked about this before. Insults early in life and the microbiome have been linked with the development of autism. So most kids seem to show up with autism around 2 to 3 years old. Autism is often linked with some kind of chronic GI condition. Maybe it's stomach pain or chronic constipation or chronic diarrhea. Also, autism, there seems to be more than one insult that happens. So early traumas are also associated with autism, like maybe the mother had eclampsia, or maybe the mother had got some kind of sickness or was on antibiotics for something. Inflammation in pregnancy, preterm births, preeclampsia, and antibiotics within those first 3 years of life, especially if they happen frequently, have all been associated with increased risk for autism. I put down here at the bottom of the screen one of the things that is being studied right now as a possible treatment for autism, or at least it's being brought up by researchers, is FMT. FMT stands for fecal microbial transplant. And in essence, what it is it's transplanting poop or fecal material from a healthy person into the colon of somebody that is sick. And now they've done this quite a bit in people that have really severe C. diff infections, and they find that the majority of people that have C. diff infections will resolve after one treatment, and those that don't resolve within one treatment, they give them a second treatment. And the statistic is really high. It's somewhere in the 90 percentile range where the C. diff infection will resolve, which is pretty amazing. So FMT is being studied as a possible alternative to things like autism to see if it helps with people. Stress. Stress is so important for so many aspects of our health and how it can negatively affect us. How does stress affect the gut? Well, stress hormones like cortisol affect our gut and our digestion. So when we talked about before how we release cortisol when we're under stress, remember that stress, we go into that fight or flight response. So if we were in a situation where we had to run away or we had to fight to protect ourselves, the body's priority would not be digestion. So digestion is slowed down when we're in that fight or flight response or when we're experiencing stress. It also tends, these hormones of stress increase gut permeability, so things can leak through the gut that shouldn't be leaking through and cause inflammation elsewhere in the body. And they're also finding that stress changes the composition of the microbiome as well. And in essence, all these things add up to inflammation. And as we've said throughout this presentation, inflammation is the biggest risk factor for many different chronic diseases. So what can we do to preserve and to heal our microbiome? Let's talk about that. Well, first of all, surround ourselves with positive microbes. Interestingly enough, they find that kids that have animals as pets and kids that grow up on farms, they have a lot more microbial diversity. Animals can be a way that we're exposed to other microbes that can be helpful to us, okay? Kids that grow up on farms and have animals have less respiratory illnesses and less allergies, okay? Gardening, when we go out and we garden, we're exposed to microbes that are in the soil. And we can come in contact with those microbes and they can provide beneficial effects to us. many of you, and perhaps not, but recently, many of you might have noticed that the FDA came out and has actually banned the use of triclosan, which is an antibiotic in hand wash. We don't want to get rid of our beneficial bacteria, and if we're constantly exposing ourselves to things like bleach and these really powerful antimicrobials in hand soap, that can actually be detrimental for us. So using a microbe-friendly approach to cleaning. So I don't use bleach, and I don't use really harsh chemicals. I use things like vinegar, and I use essential oils like lemon. My favorite cleaner of all that I use for pretty much everything is I mix a little bit of rubbing alcohol with, like for example, a third cup of rubbing alcohol with 1 teaspoon of dish soap and 1 tablespoon of ammonia. And then I fill up the bottle with water and I add about 10 drops of lemon or orange essential oil. It's my favorite cleaner. Works great. So avoid those toxic cleaners. Consume probiotics and probiotic-rich foods. So consider supplementing with probiotics as a capsule if you maybe are feeling like you're going to get sick, or if you've been exposed to a lot of people that have been sick. Use probiotics to help restore the gut flora if you've been on antibiotics. And again, you can do that both during the antibiotics. Just don't take them at the same time of day that you take the antibiotics. And then load up on them afterwards. And consume probiotic-rich foods like yogurt or like kefir or like fermented foods like fermented sauerkraut or kimchi or other foods like that. This is the woman that wrote 10% Human, which I loved that book. She's got a PhD in biology. Her name is Alana Colin. And one of the chapters of her book is You Are What They Eat. And they is referring to these beneficial bacteria. Okay, the colon provides homes for microbes numbering 1 trillion. Okay, individuals per milliliter. Here they pick up the scraps of food and convert them into energy, leaving their waste products to be absorbed into the cells of the colon's walls. Without these guts microbes, the colonic cells would wither and die, whilst most of the body's cells are fed by sugar transported in the blood. The colonic cell's main energy source is the waste products of the microbiota. So some of the metabolites that are produced by beneficial microbes are actually used as a fuel source directly by the cells of the colon. Pretty amazing, and help maintain that health of the colon. So you are what they eat. Continued. So what should we eat? Well, we should eat a diet rich in prebiotics. And remember, we talked about before that prebiotics are the fibers, the resistant starches. They're the things that we don't have the ability to digest, but these beneficial microbes do. And prebiotics are the food source for probiotics. So rich sources of prebiotics are things like vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, lettuces, carrots, onions, as well as starchy vegetables, potatoes with the skin, sweet potatoes, peas. Did you know like a cup of peas has about 12 grams of fiber in it? Pretty amazing. Whole fruits. If you're juicing the fruits or you take the skin off the fruit, you're missing a lot of that fiber. Seeds and nuts are great sources of fiber and these prebiotics, and many herbs and spices are as well. According to Dave Perlmutter, who wrote the book The Brain Maker, he's a neurologist. He says acacia gum, raw chicory root, raw Jerusalem artichoke, raw dandelion greens, raw garlic, raw leek, raw onion, cooked onion, and raw asparagus are some of the best sources of probiotics, or prebiotics, excuse me. Remember that prebiotics are like fertilizer for your probiotics. So they help them proliferate and they help establish those good colonies. Other things that we can do: avoid emulsifiers. Emulsifiers are compounds that allow the mixing of fats and water, in essence, okay? Polar substances with non-polar substances. They're used a lot in foods, not whole foods, but packaged foods. So they're what make ice cream really smooth, and they're added to a lot of baked goods so that the fat is mixed equally throughout the product. Examples on this page. The common ones you'll see are listed on this page. Polysorbate 80 is a common one in ice cream, for example. And researchers have found that when they fed mice a diet that was rich in